Graduation day was supposed to be the proudest moment of my life, but deep down, I already feared my father might find a way to ruin it. I remember waking up that morning with a strange weight pressing on my chest, the kind of heaviness that has nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with dread. The sun was spilling through my bedroom window, and for a moment I let myself believe that this day would be different, that maybe, just maybe, I would finally feel the pride I had been chasing for years. But in the back of my mind, a voice whispered the same fear I had carried with me my entire life. What if he finds a way to take this from me too? I had worked too hard for this day to let anyone taint it. Years of burning the midnight oil, staring at textbooks until the words blurred into one another, and sacrificing weekends when my friends were out laughing under neon lights. While they went to parties, I was pulling shifts at the campus library, forcing myself to stay awake with coffee that burned my throat, knowing that every hour mattered. I wanted more than just a diploma. I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe even to him, that I was capable of something greater than the expectations he had placed on me. My mother was the first to knock gently on my door. Her voice, always calm and grounding, carried through the wood. "Sweetheart, you need to start getting ready. Today's your day." She sounded proud, and for a second I leaned into that warmth, letting it soothe the ache in my chest. I knew she meant it. She had always been my anchor, the one who reminded me that my worth wasn't defined by my father's cruel words or cold stares. Still, even as I stood in front of the mirror adjusting my cap and gown, I couldn't silence the memory of his voice. "You think a piece of paper makes you better than me?" he had sneered just months before when I mentioned graduating with honors. He never raised his hand against me, but his words left bruises that sometimes hurt worse than any strike could. Every accomplishment I reached for seemed to provoke him. Every milestone I achieved seemed to highlight his own failures. And instead of celebrating me, he seemed determined to drag me back into the shadows he lived in. That morning, as I slipped on my gown, I thought about all the times I had dreamed of this day. When I was younger, graduation preparation. My mother busied herself in the kitchen, humming under her breath as if she could will the day into being peaceful. My younger brother scrolled aimlessly through his phone, pretending not to notice the tension simmering beneath the surface. And then there was my father. He sat at the dining table, arms crossed, face unreadable. He didn't congratulate me. He didn't even look at me. But I could feel his disapproval radiating from across the room, a silent storm waiting to erupt. The ride to the school was a mix of silence and forced cheer. My mother tried to fill the air with optimism, talking about how proud the neighbours would be, how this was a turning point for our family. My father only grunted in response, his eyes fixed on the road, his knuckles tight around the steering wheel. Every mile closer to the school felt heavier, like I was being pulled toward an event I wasn't sure I was ready to face. When we finally arrived, the campus was alive with energy. Families hugged in clusters, balloons bobbed in the breeze, and laughter echoed across the courtyard. Everywhere I looked, I saw pride. Mothers dabbing tears from their eyes, fathers lifting their children into embraces, siblings clapping and cheering. The air was electric with joy, and for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to feel like I belonged to that joy. But then I caught the shadow of my father out of the corner of my eye. His jaw was clenched, his face pinched as if every smile he saw was an insult to him. Inside the auditorium, the scene was overwhelming. Rows of seats filled with families, a stage lit with bright lights, and a sea of graduates in gowns like mine, each of us waiting for our turn to be recognized. The hum of voices was a mixture of excitement and nerves, whispers of celebration floating like music through the air. I tried to let it carry me, to remind myself that this was my moment too. Still, my gaze drifted to where my parents were seated. My mother leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes shining with pride. My father sat rigid, arms folded, his expression sour. He didn't belong to the energy of the room. He resisted it, like a stone in the current. I wondered if anyone else could sense the tension, if the people around us could feel the bitterness radiating from him the way I did. The ceremony began with ways to belittle them, saying, "If they're giving away money, It must not be worth much." His words had been a steady drip of poison, and I had learned to build walls around myself just to survive. But today was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be the day my work spoke louder than his criticism, when I stood tall in front of the world and claimed what I had earned. And yet, as I sat waiting for my name to be called, I could feel his eyes boring into me from the audience. It was as if he was waiting for something, waiting for the right moment to remind me that, in his world, I would never be enough. I forced a smile as classmates walked across the stage, shaking hands and posing for photos. My heart pounded harder with each passing name, my palms sweaty as I clutched the edges of my gown. The air felt thick, heavy with anticipation. Somewhere deep inside me, a small voice whispered that something was coming. I didn't know how or when, but I could feel it. He wouldn't let this day pass quietly. He wouldn't let me have this moment without leaving his mark on it. As I adjusted my graduation cap in the mirror, I had no idea the humiliation he planned for me that day. Most fathers beam with pride at their child's graduation. Mine sharpened his tongue like a weapon. The applause from the ceremony still echoed in my ears as I sat there, my heart pounding in my chest. But in that moment, I wasn't just the young woman in a cap and gown waiting for her name to be called. I was also the little girl who had spent her entire life craving something I would never receive from my father: his pride. Graduation was supposed to be the culmination of all the years I had spent fighting for recognition. But as I thought back on my life, I realized that I had been fighting the same battle since childhood. From the time I was old enough to string words together, my father seemed determined to remind me of my shortcomings. If I brought home an A on a spelling test, he pointed to the one word I had misspelled. When I scored a goal in soccer, he asked why I didn't score two. When I stood on stage at the school talent show, smiling and trembling with nerves, his only comment afterward was, "Next time, try not to look so awkward." Every success I achieved seemed to never see me as enough. The older I grew, the sharper his criticisms became. When I entered high school and started excelling academically, his resentment grew more obvious. I remember the night I got my acceptance letter to the Honor Society. My hands shook as I tore open the envelope, my mother leaning over my shoulder with excitement. "You did it," she gasped, pulling me into a hug. But when my father walked into the room and asked what the fuss was about, his face hardened the second he saw the letter. "So what? That's not going to pay the bills," he said flatly, tossing the paper back onto the counter. At the time, I couldn't understand why he reacted that way. It wasn't until later that I realized what was really behind his words. My father had once dreamed of finishing college himself, but he had dropped out after a year, blaming the cost, blaming his parents, blaming life. He had never admitted it out loud, but I saw it in the bitterness that clouded his eyes whenever education was mentioned. My success was a constant reminder of what he had failed to achieve, and instead of feeling proud, he seemed to feel exposed. I wanted his approval more than I wanted anything else. That longing shaped me, drove me, haunted me. I thought that maybe if I worked harder, if I achieved more, if I collected enough awards and accolades, he would finally look at me with pride. But the higher I climbed, the colder he became. My achievements weren't a bridge to his love, they were fuel for his resentment. As graduation day approached, the tension only grew. My mother tried to shield me from it, but I could feel it in the air, thick and unspoken. Weeks before the ceremony, when relatives asked if he was excited, he would shrug and say things like, "We'll see if she really earned it," or, "They hand out diplomas to anyone these days." His sarcasm cut deeper than he probably realized. Or maybe he knew exactly what he was doing. One night, while I was practicing my speech for the ceremony, he walked past my room and paused in the doorway. I looked up, hoping, always hoping, that he might say something kind. Instead, he smirked. "Don't embarrass yourself up there," he muttered and walked away. I sat frozen, my note cards trembling in my hands, shame burning hot in my chest. I told myself his words didn't matter, but the truth was they echoed louder than anything else. "Better than anyone else," he said at dinner one night. "It's just a piece of cloth." Another time, when my mother mentioned inviting relatives to the ceremony, he scoffed, "Why? So they can watch her trip on stage?" He delivered the lines with a smirk, like it was all a joke, but the venom behind them was impossible to ignore. I should have recognized those remarks for what they were, foreshadowing, warnings of what he was planning. But part of me refused to believe he would actually cross that line. I wanted to believe that no matter how cold he was, no matter how sharp his words could be, he wouldn't destroy one of the most important days of my life. I convinced myself that maybe deep down he would surprise me. Maybe when he saw me walk across that stage, something inside him would shift. Maybe he would finally smile and clap like the other fathers in the crowd. But that was wishful thinking. I had been clinging to that hope my entire life, and it had only ever led to disappointment. Looking back now, I can see how the signs were all there, the muttered remarks, the sour looks, the way he crossed his arms tighter every time someone else mentioned my success. He was preparing for something. He was building up to it. But in my desperate longing for his love, I ignored the storm gathering right in front of me. If only I had realized then that his bitterness was about to explode in front of the entire school. The auditorium felt like a temple of dreams, but for me, it was also a battlefield. The heavy wooden doors of the auditorium opened slowly, and for a moment I just stood there on the threshold staring at the scene inside. The air was charged with anticipation, thick with the sound of laughter and applause, buzzing like an orchestra tuning up before the symphony began. Families were already finding their seats, waving at their children across the sea of caps and gowns, holding up phones and cameras like weapons of joy ready to capture every shining moment. It should have been breathtaking. It should have felt like a moment suspended in golden light. But for me, it felt like stepping into a battlefield where every clap of hands and every proud tear reminded me of what I didn't have, what I had been chasing my whole life, and what I feared would slip through my fingers again before the night was over. Family sat. My mother leaned forward, her eyes already shimmering with emotion, clutching her purse tightly as though holding on to her own excitement. Beside her, my father sat slumped in his chair, arms folded like steel bars across his chest, his expression hard and unreadable. His eyes scanned the room with disdain, darting past the joy around him as if each display of love and pride was a personal insult. His leg bounced with irritation, his jaw clenched tight. It was as if he couldn't wait for the ceremony to be over so he could tell me how meaningless it all was. That contrast, between the families cheering around me and the storm clouds sitting in my row, stabbed at me more deeply than I wanted to admit. Every laugh, every proud cry from a parent felt like a spotlight on what I lacked. I tried to focus on my mother's smile, on her quiet strength, but my father's shadow loomed larger than her light. As we graduates filed into our seats, the principal stepped up to the podium. The microphone crackled to life, and the room quieted. His voice boomed with practiced warmth, speaking of perseverance, determination, and the bright future waiting for each of us. The crowd erupted in applause at every phrase, the words echoing like promises too big to contain. Around me, my classmates sat tall, their faces glowing as they felt seen, felt acknowledged. I wanted to let those words wrap around me too, but I couldn't, not with the weight of my father's scorn pulling me down. Every time I dared to glance at him, I saw the same things, the restless shifting, the impatient tapping of his foot, the muttering under his breath. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I knew the rhythm of those whispers. They weren't words of encouragement. They were barbs, dripping with sarcasm, waiting for the right moment to pierce. When the valedictorian spoke, the atmosphere soared even higher. She talked about late nights, self-doubt, and resilience, and I felt every word like it had been written from my own story. The room swelled with pride, applause rolling like thunder, parents leaping to their feet to clap for their children's sacrifices. My eyes stung as I thought about the nights I had cried myself to sleep over textbooks, about the sacrifices that no one saw. I wanted to clap for myself, to stand in that pride, but when I glanced at my father, his head was tilted slightly, a smirk tugging at his mouth like he was laughing. The corner grew heavier, more suffocating. I felt the dread building inside me like a drumbeat, steady and relentless. My father shifted in his seat again, his arms tightening across his chest. His lips moved in mutters, his head shaking with disapproval as though each diploma handed out was a waste of paper. My mother tried to nudge him, tried to whisper something calming, but he brushed her off with a wave of his hand. His restlessness was growing, his scowl deepening, and every cell in my body told me it was only a matter of time before the storm inside him burst. The air in the room grew thick with celebration, but around me, it was suffocating. My friends were lost in their own joy, but I sat braced, waiting for something I couldn't stop. The stage was just steps away, but it felt like miles, a distance I wasn't sure I had the strength to cross. I wanted so badly for him to stay silent. I prayed that maybe he would let this moment pass, that maybe, just this once, he would sit quietly and let me have the recognition I had earned. But the longer I sat there, the more convinced I became that I was fooling myself. The principal's voice rang out as another name was called. Applause erupted again, the room vibrating with joy. But in the corner of my eye, I saw my father lean forward, his body tense, his lips curling as if he were rehearsing something in his mind. My chest tightened. I could almost feel the words he hadn't spoken yet, words sharpened and waiting to strike. And then it happened. My name. It rang out through the auditorium, clear and strong, the moment I had been waiting for my entire life. My heart lurched into my throat, my knees trembling as I stood, the crowd clapping, my mother on her feet with tears already spilling down her cheeks. For a brief second, I allowed myself to imagine it, that this was the moment that would change everything, that I would step into the light and finally feel the pride I had been chasing for so long. And then, as my name was called, my father finally made his move. The moment that should have been my triumph turned into a scene of betrayal. My legs were trembling as I rose from my seat, the sound of my name echoing through the auditorium like a drumbeat. For one split second, I let myself believe that this was it. The moment I had earned through years of reached the steps of the stage. The storm I had been dreading broke wide open. The sound cut through the applause like glass shattering on tile. My father's voice. It wasn't a cheer. It wasn't encouragement. It was venom, sharpened and flung into the air with all the force of his resentment. "She doesn't deserve this," he bellowed, his voice echoing across the auditorium with a rage so raw it silenced everything else. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Parents turned in their seats. Teachers froze on the stage. I stopped mid-step, the breath caught in my throat, the diploma I was about to claim suddenly feeling out of reach. My eyes darted toward him, and there he was, standing now, towering above the rows of seated families, his face twisted in anger. His finger jabbed toward me like an accusation. "She's ungrateful," he shouted, his voice cracking with fury. "All these years I gave her everything, and this is how she repays me? By acting like she's better than her own father." The room went still. The kind of stillness that feels unnatural, where even breathing feels too loud. My classmates stared, their smiles fading into wide-eyed disbelief. Teachers shifted uncomfortably, their hands frozen mid-clap. My mother's face drained of colour as she clutched at his sleeve, begging him under her breath to sit down, but he shook her off violently. "She doesn't honour me," he continued, his voice rising, every syllable landing like a blow. "She acts like she made it on her own, like I had nothing to do with it. She thinks she's better than us, better than her own family." His words dripped with accusation, painting me not as a graduate, not as an achiever, but as a traitor to the very people I loved. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me whole. Every pair of eyes in that auditorium turned toward me, not with pride, not with admiration, but with pity, confusion, and shock. My chest burned with humiliation, the weight of his words pressing down on me until I could barely stand. I felt stripped, exposed, as if the gown I wore, not while he was watching, waiting for proof that he had broken me. I looked toward my mother, desperate for some anchor. Her face was twisted in anguish, her hand gripping her chest as if his words were knives cutting into her too. She tried to pull him back down into his seat, whispering frantically for him to stop, but he yanked his arm free, his voice growing louder, sharper. "You don't deserve to be celebrated," he thundered, his voice booming in the hushed hall. "You wouldn't even be here if it weren't for me. You dishonor me every time you act like your success is your own." The crowd gasped again, and I felt the humiliation crash over me in waves. My knees weakened, and for a terrifying moment I thought I might collapse right there in front of everyone. I wanted to run, to hide, to disappear. But my legs wouldn't move. My voice wouldn't come. I was paralyzed by the betrayal, the shame, the sheer cruelty of it all. This was supposed to be the moment when I proved myself, not to him but to the world. Instead, he had turned it into a spectacle, a grotesque performance of his bitterness, using my triumph as the stage for his fury. I could see the confusion in the faces around me, the disbelief. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with judgment, but all of them saw me now not as the girl who had worked her way to this moment, but as the girl whose own father had publicly disowned her achievement. I wanted to scream that he was wrong, that he hadn't given me everything, that he had given me nothing but pain and shadows. I wanted to shout that my success was mine, that I had clawed my way here in spite of him, not because of him. But the words stayed lodged in my throat, suffocated by the weight of years of silence. The auditorium, once filled with applause and celebration, was now a graveyard of sound. The air was heavy, the tension palpable. My classmates, frozen on the stage and in their seats, didn't know where to look. Some stared at me, others stared at him, but no one dared to move. It was as if the entire world had narrowed to just the two of us, me, trembling and exposed, and him, towering and relentless in his need to humiliate. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully seen and commanding, cutting through the chaos like a blade. But what he didn't expect was that someone else was ready to step in. When my father tried to break me, the last person I expected to defend me stood tall. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My father's words still hung in the air like shards of glass, sharp enough to cut through the joy and pride that had filled the room just seconds before. The silence that followed was deafening, heavier than any applause could ever be. Every eye in the auditorium was locked on him and then on me, as if they were waiting for me to respond, waiting for me to either crumble under the weight of his betrayal or rise above it. But I couldn't do either. My voice was gone, stolen by shock, my body frozen in place as humiliation burned hot across my face. And then, just when I thought the moment might stretch into eternity, another voice pierced the silence, calm, steady, and commanding. That will be enough. It wasn't loud in the way my father's voice had been, but it carried more weight than his shouting ever could. The crowd shifted, heads turning toward the stage where the principal stood behind the podium, his expression grave but composed. He didn't raise his voice, didn't match my father's fury with fury of his own. Instead, he wielded authority with a kind of quiet strength that made the entire room lean in, listening. My father's mouth was still open, ready to unleash more venom. But the principal raised his hand, and the gesture alone was enough to silence him. "Mr. Johnson," he said firmly, his voice echoing through the microphone. "This ceremony is about honoring the accomplishments of our students. It is not a stage for anyone else's bitterness." The crowd murmured, a ripple of approval sweeping through the rows. My father stiffened, his face flushing with anger. But he didn't sit down. Instead, he jabbed his finger toward me again, his voice shaking now with indignation. "You don't know her. You don't know what she's really like. She's—" "Stop." The principal's word cut through my father's outburst like a blade. It wasn't shouted, but it caught between the humiliation of what had just happened and the overwhelming relief of being defended, finally, by someone in a position of... My father looked around, his eyes darting, as if searching for an ally in the crowd, but he found none. The applause grew louder, people rising to their feet,
clapping not just for me, but against him. He had wanted to shame me in front of everyone, but now he was the one standing alone, his anger unraveling into something desperate and small. The principal turned to me then, his voice softening as he gestured for me to continue walking toward the stage. "Come forward," he said. "You've earned this." My legs felt heavy, as though they were wading through water, but somehow I moved. The applause surrounded me, a cocoon of sound that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. I stepped onto the stage, my vision blurred with tears, and when the principal shook my hand, he leaned slightly closer and said words I would never forget. "Don't let anyone steal this from you. This is yours." Those words lodged themselves deep in my chest, a lifeline pulling me back from the abyss my father had tried to cast me into. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not just as a student, not just as a name on a diploma, but as a person whose effort mattered. The crowd erupted again as the diploma was placed in my hands. I smiled for the camera, though it trembled on my lips, knowing the picture would forever carry the scars of this moment. My mother stood in the crowd, her hands pressed together, tears streaming freely down her face, pride and relief written in every line. My father, though, remained rigid, his arms crossed again, his face a mask of rage. I returned to my seat, the applause still ringing in my ears, but inside I was reeling. Part of me wanted to revel in the validation, to let the principal's defense wash away the sting of my father's betrayal, but another part of me knew the truth. This wasn't over. My father wouldn't let it end here. He had been embarrassed, silenced in front of the entire community, and if there was one thing I knew about him, it was that he would never forgive me for that. As the ceremony continued, I clutched my diploma with shaking hands, my stomach churning. The applause faded into the background, the speeches blurred into noise. All I could think about was the look on my father's insults, but the damage to my heart lingered. When the ceremony ended, the sound of clapping still echoed in my ears, but instead of lifting me higher, it felt hollow, almost mocking. I clutched my diploma tightly, as if it could anchor me against the chaos still swirling in my chest. The crowd slowly began to disperse, families spilling into the aisles with laughter, hugs, and endless photo-taking. Everywhere around me there was joy, fathers hoisting their children onto their shoulders, mothers wiping away proud tears, siblings snapping pictures. It was a symphony of love and pride, but I couldn't hear it the way everyone else did. For me, the sound was distorted, warped by the memory of my father's voice cutting through it all. I forced myself to smile when classmates congratulated me, but inside I was unraveling. Whispers followed me wherever I walked. I caught the sideways glances, the hushed comments passed between parents and students alike. "Did you see her dad? I can't believe he said that. Poor girl." Their words weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. They carried pity, and pity felt like a different kind of wound. I didn't want to be the girl people pitied. I wanted to be the girl who had earned her place on that stage, the girl whose hard work had finally paid off. My mother was at my side almost immediately, her arms wrapping around me in a desperate embrace. Her tears soaked my gown, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Don't you let him take this from you. Not today." She held me as if she could shield me from the shame, as if her arms alone could erase what the entire auditorium had witnessed. For a moment, I let myself sink into her comfort, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume, clinging to her strength. But just over her shoulder, I saw him, my father. He didn't wait for me. He didn't congratulate me. He didn't even look at me. He stormed out of the auditorium with long, furious strides, his jaw clenched, his fists balled at his sides. The crowd parted for him like water around a stone. Everyone staring, everyone whispering, but he didn't care. He left the building as if he had been the one wronged, as if the ceremony itself had betrayed him. The slam just looked at me with that same expression of pity I had come to despise. One of my closest friends finally hugged me, her voice low in my ear. "Don't listen to him," she whispered. "Everyone here saw the truth. Everyone knows you deserve this." Her words should have comforted me, but instead they stung, because deep down I wondered if that was true. Did everyone really see me for who I was? Or did they now only see me as the girl whose father had humiliated her in front of an entire community? The photographs my mother insisted on taking afterward felt staged, unnatural. I posed with classmates, my smile frozen in place, my diploma held awkwardly in my hands. Behind the camera, parents cheered and laughed, but in every photo I could feel the shadow of what had happened. I wasn't celebrating. I was surviving. As we left the school, my mother kept her arm looped through mine, as if she was afraid I might collapse without her support. My brother walked quietly beside us, his face pale, his usual smirk absent. None of us spoke about my father. We didn't need to. His absence said enough. The car ride home was suffocating. My mother tried to keep her voice light, praising me, recounting moments from the ceremony, telling me over and over again how proud she was. I nodded. I thanked her. But my mind wasn't in the car. It was still back in that auditorium, trapped in the silence after his words, replaying every syllable like a cruel record stuck on repeat. Humiliation simmered inside me, mingled with anger so sharp it made my chest ache. How could he do that to me? How could he stand in front of everyone and reduce me to nothing when he knew how hard I had worked? But then another voice crept in, quieter, more insidious. Maybe he was right. Maybe you don't deserve this. Maybe you are ungrateful. I clenched my fists in my lap, shaking my head to banish the thought. Number. I had earned this. Every late night, every exam, every sacrifice, I had earned it. His cruelty wasn't about me, it was about him. Slowly, painfully, that truth began to settle in my heart. His words weren't a reflection of my worth. They were a mirror of his own.
Nodded, but my heart was racing. We stepped inside, the air heavy and still. My father was there, sitting at the table, his face shadowed, his posture rigid. He didn't look up as we entered, didn't acknowledge my mother's attempts at peace. The silence stretched, brittle and suffocating. And then he spoke, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the air. That night, when I returned home, his real intentions finally surfaced. If graduation day was the explosion, that night was the fallout. The house felt heavier than ever when we walked inside, like the walls themselves had absorbed the venom of what had happened earlier. My diploma still sat in my hands, a symbol I wanted to hold on to, but even it felt tainted by the weight of my father's voice echoing through that auditorium. My mother tried to usher me into the kitchen, her voice soft and soothing, as though a cup of tea in a quiet moment could erase the humiliation I had endured. But I knew it wouldn't be that easy. He was waiting for us. My father sat at the table, his posture stiff, his face locked in that same unreadable mask. A single lamp cast long shadows across his features, making him look older, harsher, almost unrecognizable. His silence stretched like a rope, tightening around my chest until I could hardly breathe. My brother lingered near the stairs, clearly torn between wanting to flee and wanting to witness the storm he knew was about to break. Finally, my father leaned back in his chair and let out a sound that was part laugh, part scoff. "You think I embarrassed you today?" His eyes narrowed, gleaming with a cold fire. "No. What I did was teach you humility." The words stung, their cruelty wrapped in the guise of wisdom. My jaw clenched, but before I could respond, my mother's voice cut through the tension. "Humility?" she snapped, her face flushed with anger. "You humiliated her. In front of the entire school, in front of strangers, in front of people who have no idea what she's endured to get here. That wasn't humility, that was cruelty." He slammed his hand on the table, the sound cracking through the room like thunder. "You don't understand," he barked. "She walks around like she's better than me, better than this family, better than everything I've built. Someone had to put achievements mean something I don't have. I could have had everything you have if life hadn't cheated me." His eyes burned into mine, and I saw something deeper than anger there. I saw jealousy, raw, corrosive jealousy. The realization hit me like a physical blow. His rage wasn't just about me, it was about him. Every insult, every criticism, every cutting remark had been born out of his own failures, his own unfulfilled dreams.
He hadn't been tearing me down because I was unworthy. He had been tearing me down because my success reminded him of what he would never have. My mother's voice rose again, trembling with fury. This isn't about you. This is about her. She's accomplished something incredible, and instead of standing by her, you tried to destroy it. Do you know what that makes you? It makes you small. It makes you weak. He turned on her then, his voice a roar. Weak? You call me weak? I'm the one who kept this family together. I'm the one who sacrificed everything, and this is the thanks I get? A daughter who thinks she's smarter than me? A wife who doesn't respect me? His words flew like daggers, each one aimed to wound, to silence. But I wasn't silent anymore. My chest ached, my throat burned, but I stood my ground. You didn't sacrifice everything for me, I said, my voice cracking. You sacrificed nothing. You gave up on yourself. And now you're punishing me because I didn't give up too. You should be proud of me. You should be standing beside me. But you can't, because my success reminds you of everything you lost. The room shook with the weight of our words. My mother stood beside me now, her hand on my shoulder, her eyes blazing with the kind of fire I had always admired in her. You will not take this from her, she said firmly. Not tonight, not ever again. For a moment, I thought he might back down. His face softened just slightly, the fight flickering in his eyes. But then, just as quickly, it hardened again, and what came out of his mouth next was colder than anything he had said before. You think this is about pride? He sneered. You don't even know the half of it.
Holding their breath, waiting for his next words. My mother's hand trembled where it rested on my shoulder, and my brother's face was pale, his eyes darting nervously between us. My father leaned forward at the table, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on me with a strange mixture of triumph and malice. I had braced myself for anger, for more cruel words, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. You think you got here on your own? He sneered, his voice dripping with venom. You think every achievement was yours? Let me tell you something. You only ever succeeded because I let you. I blinked, confused, my breath catching in my throat. What are you talking about? His mouth twisted into a bitter smile, a smile that had no joy in it, only spite. You think all those opportunities came to you because you were special? Number. I was the one pulling the strings. I was the one deciding which doors opened for you and which ones didn't. My chest tightened. What do you mean? I asked, my voice trembling. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold, his tone almost casual, as if he were confessing something insignificant. Do you remember the internship you applied for during junior year, the one you were so excited about? They sent a letter saying you'd been accepted. I tore it up before you ever saw it. The words hit me like a physical blow. My knees weakened, my hands trembling where they clutched my diploma. You did what? He shrugged. I told myself it was for your own good. You were getting too proud, too sure of yourself. You needed to be reminded that the world doesn't hand things out so easily. So I made sure you didn't get everything you wanted. Tears burned in my eyes, my mind racing through the years, trying to piece together every rejection, every unexplained silence, every opportunity that had vanished before it even began. The scholarship, I whispered. The one I applied for in high school. They said they never received my paperwork. Was that you? His smile deepened, crueler now. You were already getting enough help. You didn't need more. And yes, I threw away the letter before you could mail it. You think money grows on trees? You think you deserve to have it all handed to you? My stomach twisted, nausea rising in my throat. Every memory of him discouraging me, mocking back. Every time I thought I wasn't good enough, every time I believed I had failed, it was you. You did that to me. For years I had carried the weight of those failures, convincing myself they were proof that I wasn't as capable as I wanted to believe. I had blamed myself for every rejection, every missed chance, every letter that never came. And now I realized those scars weren't mine to carry. They were his.
He had placed them on me deliberately, piece by piece, until I had nearly drowned in them. His face hardened, his voice rising. You don't get it, do you? I should have been the one with those chances. I should have been the one standing on that stage today. But I didn't get them. Life didn't hand me anything. And then you, my own daughter, come along, acting like you're better, like you're smarter, like you're destined for more than I ever was. Do you know what that feels like? To watch your own child outshine you in everything, when all you can see is your own failures staring back at you? My heart broke in ways I didn't think were possible. His anger wasn't just about me. It had never been just about me. It was about the shadow of his own disappointment, his resentment for a life he thought he should have lived. And instead of facing his failures, he had projected them onto me, using me as the scapegoat for everything he had lost. My mother's voice cracked as she spoke, her fury trembling beneath her words. You've been sabotaging her? You've been destroying her confidence, her chances, her life? She is your daughter. You're supposed to protect her, support her, not tear her down. But he didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He leaned closer, his eyes locking on mine with a cold finality. I didn't sabotage her. I saved her from herself. And you know what? I'd do it again. Because she doesn't deserve to think she's better than me. Not now, not ever. I felt something inside me shatter. All those years of longing for his approval, of bending under his criticism, of hoping he would one day see me and be proud, none of it had ever been real. He was never going to give me what I craved because he had never seen me as his daughter to cherish. He had only ever seen pain couldn't cut deeper. When I thought I had finally uncovered the darkest part of his cruelty, he opened his mouth again, and what came out next left me colder than anything before. I thought I had reached the depth of betrayal, but worse was still to come. When betrayal isolates you, unexpected allies can change everything. The night after my father's confession, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my diploma resting on the desk across the room. It should have been a source of pride, a reminder of everything I had achieved despite the obstacle, but instead it felt tainted. Every time I looked at it, I could hear his voice again, reminding me of the letters he had thrown away, the opportunities he had stolen, the lies he had fed me for years. Sleep never came. My mind raced with anger, grief, and disbelief, while my body remained locked in the kind of exhaustion that no rest could cure. By morning, my eyes were swollen, my chest hollow. My mother tried to comfort me with breakfast and gentle words, but I could see the devastation in her eyes too. She had stood by me, defended me, but she was just as broken by his betrayal as I was. My brother avoided me altogether, his silence betraying the confusion and fear he carried. The house felt like a prison, every wall echoing with the weight of my father's venom. I needed to escape. When I returned to school the next day to return my gown, I half expected the whispers to start again, for people to avoid me, or worse, pity me. But what I didn't expect was to be stopped in the hallway by one of my teachers, Mr. Reynolds, my English teacher and the faculty advisor for the debate club. He was a man known for his quiet presence, never the loudest voice in the room, but always the one who made his words count. He stepped into my path, his expression softer than I had ever seen it. "Can we talk?" he asked gently. I followed him into his classroom, the familiar scent of chalk and old books wrapping around me like a memory of safer times. I sat at one of the desks, my hands folded tightly in my lap, bracing myself for whatever pity or platitudes he might offer. But instead, he surprised me.
The ceremony. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Validation. Real validation. Not applause from a crowd that didn't know me, not empty congratulations from classmates, but recognition from someone who had seen my journey up close. Tears slid down my cheeks, hot and unrelenting. "He's been doing it for years," I admitted, my voice breaking, "sabotaging me.
making sure I failed before I even had a chance. And all this time, I thought I wasn't good enough. Mr. Reynolds' eyes softened even further. That's not on you. That's his bitterness talking, his failure, not yours. And the fact that you've still managed to achieve as much as you have, that says everything about your strength. The words cracked something open inside me. For so long, I had felt like I was clawing at a wall no one else could see, trying to climb while someone kept pulling me down. And here was someone telling me that I hadn't imagined it, that the fight had been real, and that surviving it made me stronger than I realized. He reached for a folder on his desk and slid it across to me. You have options, he said. Scholarships, internships, programs, doors that are still open. Don't let what he did make you think those doors aren't meant for you. You have a future, and it's brighter than he wants you to believe. I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the opportunities he had collected for me. My chest tightened again, but this time with something different. Hope. For the first time, I began to see that my father didn't have the power to define my life. He could try to sabotage me, but he couldn't erase the work I had done or the people who believed in me. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Reynolds became more than just a teacher. He became a mentor, a steady voice reminding me that I wasn't alone, that my father's shadow didn't have to swallow me whole. He introduced me to professors at the local college, connected me with alumni who had walked similar paths, and reminded me that support could come from unexpected places. Slowly, piece by piece, I began to build a new foundation, not one rooted in my father's approval, but in my own resilience and the encouragement of those who saw me clearly. It wasn't easy. The whispers at school didn't vanish overnight, and the weight of my father's betrayal still clung to me in ways I couldn't shake. But for the first time, I felt like I had a choice. I could carry his bit before. But even as that strength grew, even as I began to imagine a future outside of his shadow, a gnawing unease remained. Because if there was one thing I knew about my father, it was that he never let go. Being silenced at the graduation had been a wound to his pride, and pride was the one thing he clung to tighter than anything else. And I was right to worry. Because just as I began to rebuild myself, just as I started to gather allies and find my footing, he was already planning his next move. But even as I gained allies, my father was planning one final act to break me. I thought his cruelty had peaked, but my father wasn't finished humiliating me. After graduation, I had convinced myself that the worst was behind me. He had humiliated me in public, confessed to sabotaging my past, and made it clear that he would never see me as anything more than a reflection of his own failures. It was brutal, but I thought maybe that was the breaking point, the moment when he had exhausted his rage. I was wrong. It began quietly, in whispers I wasn't supposed to hear. At the grocery store, 2 women in line lowered their voices when I passed by. At church, a family friend avoided my eyes as I greeted her, her smile thin and awkward. Even on social media, comments that once celebrated my graduation grew colder, more distant, until I could feel the shift in every interaction. My stomach twisted with dread, but I didn't understand what was happening until a classmate finally pulled me aside. I don't know if you know, her voice hesitant, but your dad's been saying things to people. My heart dropped. What kind of things? She bit her lip. That you didn't really earn your grades, that you cheated, that teachers gave you special treatment. He even said the scholarship offers you got weren't real, that you lied to make yourself look better. The words slammed into me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to laugh, to deny it, to brush it off as ridiculous. But the look in her eyes told me it was worse than I realized. This wasn't just gossip. It was spreading. And
The thought made me sick. My father wasn't just content to tear me down in private, or even in front of a crowd. He wanted to erase me entirely, to rewrite my story so that no one would ever see me for who I truly was. And for a while, it worked. The weight of the rumors pressed down on me until I could hardly breathe. I started questioning myself again, wondering if maybe everyone believed him, if maybe I should just disappear quietly rather than fight a battle I couldn't win. My confidence cracked.
My hope wavered, and for the first time since the ceremony, I thought about giving up. Maybe it wasn't worth it. Maybe I wasn't strong enough to outrun the shadow he had cast over me. One night, I sat alone in my room with my diploma on my lap, tears dripping onto the paper. It felt less like a symbol of victory and more like a target, proof that my father had aimed his cruelty at me because I had dared to succeed. The thought of pursuing college, of stepping into the next chapter of my life, suddenly felt impossible. What good was hard work if the people around me believed his lies? But then, in the darkest of moments, I wasn't alone. My mother came into my room and sat beside me, her hand wrapping around mine. She didn't try to force optimism, didn't tell me to just ignore him. Instead, her voice was steady, unyielding. He can talk all he wants, but he can't take the truth from you. You earned this, and deep down, you know it. Don't let his bitterness write the story of your life. Her words were a lifeline, but what surprised me most was that I wasn't only hearing it from her. Mr. Reynolds, my mentor, called me into his classroom after school. He had heard the whispers too, and instead of pity, he gave me resolve. People will believe lies if they're repeated loudly enough, he said, but the truth has a way of standing on its own. You can't control what your father says, but you can control how you live. Every step forward you take will be proof he was wrong. Don't let him stop you now. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to let their words be enough. And slowly, piece by piece, I felt something inside me harden, not in bitterness, but in strength. My father could tarnish my name in the community, but he couldn't undo the hours I had poured into my studies, the nights I had fought through exhaustion,
Eyes scanning the letter inside. At first, the words blurred, my mind refusing to process them. Then it hit me. It was an invitation. The principal, the same man who had silenced my father at the ceremony, wanted to meet with me privately. My mother's hand flew to her mouth as she read over my shoulder, her eyes wide. "Why would he call you in again?" she whispered. My chest tightened with both fear and hope. Was it good news? Bad news? Was he going to tell me the rumors had spread too far, that even the school was questioning me? Or was this something else entirely? I didn't know. But what I did know was that whatever came next would change everything. Then came the unexpected invitation. The principal wanted to meet me again. The same principal who silenced my father was about to give me the recognition of a lifetime. When I walked into the school office the following week, my palms were slick with sweat, my chest tight with nerves. The letter had been short, almost cryptic, offering no hint of why the principal wanted to meet me again. After everything that had happened, I half expected to be told that the whispers had reached the administration, that my father's lies had cast too long a shadow. The thought of losing everything I had worked for because of him gnawed at me until I could hardly breathe. The secretary smiled faintly as she gestured for me to go in. The principal's office door loomed large, and as I stepped inside, I braced myself for disappointment. Instead, I found the principal standing near his desk, a folder in his hands and a warm expression on his face. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice steady and kind. He gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "Please, sit." I lowered myself onto the chair, my body tense, my diploma still tucked under my arm as if I might need to cling to it for dear life. He studied me for a moment, and then his tone shifted to something heavier, something deliberate. "I know it hasn't been easy for you," he said. "What happened at the ceremony, what your father said, no student should ever have to endure that. And yet, you handled yourself with remarkable grace." My throat tightened. I didn't feel for your achievements, but for the way you've persevered. Students like you don't just succeed for themselves, they inspire others. And I want you to know that your story doesn't end with his words. It continues here, with recognition for what you've overcome. Tears blurred my vision. For years I had fought to be seen, to be acknowledged beyond the shadow of my father's criticism. And here, in this office, I was finally being recognized, not as the daughter of a bitter man, not as the girl humiliated on stage,
but as someone worthy in my own right. But the principal wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his voice steady. I've also nominated you for a scholarship through the state university. They're looking for students who show resilience, leadership, and the ability to rise above challenges. I can't think of anyone who embodies that more than you. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. The idea of college had been slipping from my grasp in recent weeks, tainted by my father's lies and the doubts they had planted in me. And now, here was a lifeline, extended in the form of a scholarship that could change everything. The principal's eyes shone with quiet conviction. Don't let his bitterness dictate your future. You have earned every opportunity in front of you, and I believe, no, I know, that you're going to do great things. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself believe it too. I sat there with the award in my hands, the scholarship nomination still sinking in, and a weight lifted from my chest. The whispers in the community, the rumors my father had spread, suddenly felt smaller, less powerful. They couldn't erase this moment. They couldn't erase the truth. When I left the office that afternoon, the sun felt warmer, the world brighter. My mother was waiting outside, her eyes questioning, her hands clenched nervously. When I showed her the award and told her about the scholarship, her face crumpled with tears, and she pulled me into the fiercest hug I had ever felt. I knew it, she whispered. I knew they would see you for who you are. That night, for the first time since graduation, I slept soundly. The nightmares of his voice still lingered, but they no longer had the same power.
Lifted me, but to heal, I had to confront the source of my pain. The award and scholarship should have been enough to silence the storm inside me, but they weren't. They validated me, yes. They gave me hope, yes. But the truth was, no certificate, no applause, no scholarship could undo the years of wounds carved into me by my father's words and actions. Every achievement, every smile, every moment of pride felt incomplete as long as his shadow remained. To move forward, I knew I had to go back. I had to face him directly, not as the trembling daughter who once begged for his approval, but as the woman who had finally learned she didn't need it anymore. That decision terrified me. For days, I rehearsed the conversation in my head. I practiced in the mirror. I whispered into my pillow at night. I even drafted letters I never sent. Each version was sharper, more direct. But when I imagined looking into his eyes, I still felt like the little girl desperate for scraps of praise. And yet, deep down, I knew I couldn't keep avoiding him. If I wanted peace, if I wanted freedom, I had to cut the chain where it began. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. He was sitting in the living room one evening, the television flickering in the background, his posture the same rigid stance that had haunted my entire childhood. My mother was in the kitchen, my brother upstairs. It was just him and me, the silence between us thicker than the air. I stood there for a long moment, my heart hammering against my ribs, until finally I forced myself to step forward. He didn't look up. "What do you want?" he muttered, his eyes still fixed on the screen. I swallowed hard, my palms sweating, but my voice came out steadier than I felt. "I want to talk." That made him glance at me, his expression skeptical, almost amused. "Talk? About what? Haven't you had enough people patting you on the back lately?" His sarcasm stung, but I didn't let it derail me. I sat down across from him, my hands folded in my lap. For a long moment, I just looked at him, the lines etched into his face, the bitterness clinging to every corner of his expression. And then I began. "All my life," I said slowly, carefully, "I've wanted one thing from you. Just one. I wanted you to be proud of me. I wanted you to see
me humility, but it wasn't. It was about you. It was about your failures, your jealousy, your refusal to accept that your daughter could succeed where you didn't. You sabotaged me because you couldn't stand to be overshadowed by me. And I've carried that weight for too long." For the first time, he looked unsettled. His eyes flickered, his mouth opened, then closed again.
He wasn't used to me speaking this way. I leaned forward, my voice steady now, stronger with every word. But here's the truth. You don't get to control me anymore. You don't get to define me, or my success, or my future. I've earned everything I've achieved, and no amount of lies or sabotage can erase that. You've tried to break me my entire life, but I'm still standing, stronger than you ever expected. His face hardened, but I pressed on. I'm done chasing your approval. I'm done letting your bitterness dictate how I see myself. From this moment on, I won't let you hold that power over me again. I am not your failure. I am not your shadow. I am me, and I am enough. The silence that followed was electric, charged with years of unspoken tension. He stared at me, his hands gripping the arms of the chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. For a moment, I thought he might explode again, unleash the same venom he had used all my life. But he didn't. He just sat there, his eyes locked on mine, as though he didn't recognize the person sitting across from him. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost disbelieving.
You think you're stronger than me?
I didn't flinch. I don't think it. I know it. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the weight of my words hanging between us. I expected anger. I expected denial. I even expected violence. But what I saw instead was shock, genuine shock. He had spent so long breaking me down that he never anticipated the day I would rise back up. And then, just when I thought he might soften, just when I thought there might be some crack in the armor.
But it was also liberating, because if his pride was never mine to win, then I no longer had to fight for it. I no longer had to contort myself into shapes that fit inside his bitterness. I no longer had to live in the shadow of his disappointment. So I made a decision, a quiet, private decision that would change everything. I would cut the chain. I didn't announce it to him. I didn't scream it across the dinner table or write it in a dramatic letter. Instead, I let my actions speak. I stopped trying to impress him. I stopped bracing myself for his approval or dreading his criticism. I stopped giving him the power to dictate how I felt about myself. And with every small step away from him, I felt a weight lifting from my chest. At first, it was terrifying. Detachment didn't happen overnight. Years of conditioning made me want to run back, to explain myself, to beg for some sliver of acknowledgement. But every time that urge rose, I reminded myself of the truth. His lack of love wasn't a reflection of me. It was a reflection of him, and I refused to let his reflection distort my worth any longer. Instead, I turned my focus inward. I poured myself into my independence. College applications became more than paperwork. They became my escape, my path to a life where I defined my own value. I studied harder, not because I was desperate for his approval, but because I wanted a future that was mine alone. I worked part-time jobs, saving every dollar, determined to prove that I could build something without him. With every achievement, my confidence grew. The scholarship I earned from the principal's nomination opened doors I had once feared would stay locked. Professors and mentors who saw my resilience gave me opportunities my father could never take away. Slowly, I built a support system outside of my family. Friends who celebrated me without jealousy. Teachers who guided me without resentment. People who saw me not as an extension of him, but as an individual worthy of respect. And as I grew stronger, I watched him shrink. My father, once the loudest voice in every room, began to fade into the background of his own bitterness. His attempts to poison the community with lies lost their impact as people saw me thrive,
Realize what he had lost. But over time, the pity faded too. I no longer needed him to change. I no longer needed anything from him at all. The freedom was bittersweet. Some nights, I lay awake wondering what it would have been like to have a father who clapped the loudest at my graduation.
who framed my diploma on the wall, who told anyone who would listen how proud he was of me. But those nights grew fewer, and in their place came something stronger. Peace. I was no longer chasing a ghost. I was no longer defined by what he refused to give. I was defined by what I gave myself. Worth, independence, resilience. The world outside of him opened wide. College brought new challenges, but also new triumphs. I found myself thriving in ways I hadn't imagined, debating in classrooms, writing papers that earned praise, making friends who saw me without the weight of family drama attached. Each success became a brick in the foundation of the life I was building, a life far removed from the bitterness of the man who had once tried to break me. And yet, even as I grew stronger, even as I built a life that was mine alone, I couldn't shake the faint hum of unfinished business. Because while I had detached, while I had broken free, he was still there, sitting in that same house, carrying the same venom. He was still my father, and the story between us didn't feel entirely closed. For years, he had defined himself as my judge, my critic, my saboteur. But what happens to a man when the person he tried to control walks away? When the daughter he sought to silence finds her voice and leaves him with nothing but his own echo? I told myself I didn't care. I told myself the chapter was over. But deep down, I knew. Life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. But just when I thought I had closed the chapter, life surprised me with one more twist. Years later, the man who broke me came back with words I never expected to hear. Time has a way of changing people, or at least changing the way we see them. By the time I graduated from college, I had built a life that felt like it belonged to me. I had friends who felt like family, professors who encouraged me, and opportunities my younger self could only have dreamed of. My career path stretched ahead,
Painted with the fading hues of sunset when I heard the knock. I opened the door expecting a neighbor, maybe a delivery. Instead, I saw him, my father. He looked different, smaller somehow. His once broad shoulders were hunched, his face lined with wrinkles that seemed deeper than his age. His hair was thinner, grayer, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. He didn't look like the towering figure who had haunted my childhood. He looked old, fragile. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the years of silence stretching between us like an ocean. My throat tightened, my chest heavy with emotions I couldn't untangle. Anger, sorrow, shock, and something dangerously close to pity. Finally, he spoke, his voice raspier than I remembered. "Can I come in?" Every instinct in me screamed to slam the door, to protect the life I had built from the man who had tried so hard to destroy it. But something in his eyes, something weary, something desperate, made me step aside. He walked into my living room, moving slowly, as though each step carried the weight of years. He sank onto the couch, his hands clasped together, and for the first time in my life, I saw him hesitate before speaking. "I know I don't deserve to be here," he began, his voice low. "And I know I've done things, said things, that no father should ever say to his child. But I needed to see you. I needed to tell you that I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, fragile and unbelievable. Sorry. The word I had begged for as a child, the word I had cried for as a teenager, the word I had long given up on hearing. But it wasn't that simple. I sat across from him, my arms folded tightly across my chest, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and longing. "Sorry?" I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. "You think a word can erase everything you did? The years of tearing me down, the humiliation, the sabotage, the lies? Do you have any idea what that did to me?" His shoulders sagged, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I know," he whispered. "I know I can't take it back. I can't undo it. I was angry, I was jealous, and I took it out on you when you were the last person who deserved it. And I've lived with that guilt every day since." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let the apology
Don't even expect you to want me here. But I couldn't let the years pass without telling you I was wrong, completely wrong.
The sight of his tears shook me more than his words. This was the man who had always stood tall, always wielded his bitterness like a weapon. And now he sat before me, broken, defeated, reaching out for something he had never given, grace.
I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell him it was too late, that no apology could undo the scars. Another part of me wanted to collapse into those words, to finally hear what I had needed my entire life. The conflict tore at me, leaving me suspended between resentment and forgiveness. I don't know if I can forgive you, I admitted finally, my voice low. I don't know if I'll ever be able to, but I hear you, and I'll carry that with me. He nodded, his shoulders trembling. That's all I can ask. The silence that followed was thick with emotion. He sat there, older and weaker, while I sat taller than I ever had before. The roles between us reversed. For the first time, he wasn't the one holding power. I was. And in that moment, I realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing him. It wasn't about forgetting what he had done. It was about choosing what I carried forward. Whether I forgave him or not, I no longer needed his approval. I no longer needed his pride. I had already built a life without it. But as I looked into his eyes, filled with regret and desperation, I knew the choice I made in that moment would shape not just my future, but his. As I looked into his eyes, I knew the decision I made would define my future. Graduation wasn't about the diploma. It was about the moment I finally graduated from his shadow. As I sat across from my father, older now, weaker now, his apology still hanging in the air, I realized that the decision I made in that moment wasn't just about him. It was about me, about the girl who had once begged for his approval, about the young woman who had stood humiliated on stage, about the survivor who had rebuilt herself piece by piece. This choice would define the way I carried my past into my future. He looked at me with eyes that finally showed something.
Give you the kind of forgiveness you want. But I'm done letting what you did define me. I've built a life without your approval. I've learned that my worth was never yours to measure. And that is enough. His eyes dropped, his shoulders slumped. He nodded once, a faint, broken smile tugging at his lips. That's fair, he whispered. That's more than I deserve. And just like that, I felt something loosen inside me. Not joy, not relief, not even closure in the way I once imagined it, but freedom. The kind of freedom that comes when you stop fighting for something that was never yours to win. From that day forward, I carried myself differently. I walked into classrooms, into interviews, into friendships with a sense of worth that no rumor, no sabotage, no absence of applause could erase. I stopped replaying the moments of humiliation in my mind. I stopped wondering what it would feel like if he clapped for me, if he called me his pride, if he stood by my side, because I finally understood I didn't need it. My real graduation hadn't happened on that stage with a diploma in my hands. It happened years later in a quiet living room, when I looked my father in the eyes and realized I no longer needed him to define me. That was the day I stepped fully into my own life. He faded into the background after that. We spoke occasionally, but the dynamic had shifted forever. He was no longer the figure towering over me, controlling how I saw myself. He became just a man, flawed, bitter, broken, but no longer powerful enough to shape my identity. And I flourished. I took the scholarship, pursued my studies, and built a career that gave me both independence and pride. I surrounded myself with people who lifted me, not tore me down. I found mentors who believed in me, friends who celebrated me, and eventually, a chosen family who reminded me every day that worth isn't earned through someone else's approval. It wasn't easy. The scars of my father's betrayal didn't disappear overnight. There were still nights when his words echoed in my head, still moments when doubt crept in. But I learned to answer those echoes with my own voice, stronger now, steadier now, a voice that said, I am enough. I have always been enough.
Finally win his smile, the one who stood on stage with tears burning her eyes as his voice tore through the applause. I wish I could go back and hold her, tell her that none of his words defined her, that one day she would walk away stronger, freer, unshaken by his shadow.
But since I can't, I live every day as proof that she was always stronger than she knew. And so I leave you with this. We all carry people in our lives whose approval we chase, whose love we ache for, whose validation we think we need to feel complete. But how many of us spend our lives chasing approval from those least willing to give it? And when do we finally let go? That was my true graduation. If this story touched you, press like and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Tell me in the comments, have you ever chased approval that was never given? And how did you break free? Subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the next story of resilience and transformation.